Welcome to the Contemporary Music SuperStudy 4 Deep Dive. My name is Jay Nacklis, one of the members of the consultant team at Coleman Insights. And this is our fourth straight year of presenting our annual study of contemporary music tastes. And just as the world has been a little different the last couple of years, so has the SuperStudy. Now we're going to have a Q&A after the presentation, but you don't need to wait until then to ask a question. If you see something that sparks a question sometime during the presentation, just type it in the question pane and we will save it for the Q&A. So without further ado, let's get started with the show. From Coleman Insights, here is Warren Kurtzman.
Thanks, Jay, and thanks for joining us today, everyone. I'm Warren Kurtzman of Coleman Insights, and in a few moments, I will be joined on this presentation by my colleagues, John Boyne and Sam Milkman. Today, we'd like to share with you the major findings of Contemporary Music SuperStudy 4, the follow-up to the previous Contemporary Music SuperStudies we released over the 3 previous years. You may have already seen some of the findings that we've released publicly over the past few weeks, but today we're going to take a bit of a deeper dive into the data. Now, what you're about to see is the result of a massive music test conducted on the same online platform we use for delivering Fact 360 strategic music tests to our radio station clients. By massive, I mean that we surveyed 1,000 respondents between the ages of 12 and 54 across the United States and Canada. We employed quotas covering age, gender, ethnicity, and geography to ensure that our sample appropriately represents the population. To build the list of titles to be tested, we once again worked with our friends at Luminate, formerly known as MRC Data. And using their data, we compiled a list of 2021's most consumed songs based on streaming, radio airplay, and sales. That list revealed interesting nuggets, including that Levitating by Dua Lipa featuring DaBaby was the #1 song last year in terms of streaming and radio airplay, while Butter by BTS was 2021's leader in terms of sales. We then supplemented that list by adding the most consumed songs across 6 genres: pop, country, alternative rock, hip-hop R&B, electronic dance, and Latin, to make sure we had an appropriate representation of each in our study. Finally, we removed songs that were more than 5 years old. For example, among 2021's most consumed songs that fit that description were Journey's Don't Stop Believin' and Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas, 2 songs with amazing staying power that we've had to exclude from our last 2 studies as well. Another example of an older song we had to exclude this year was The Neighborhood's Sweater Weather, a 2012 song that has experienced a resurgence in popularity driven by TikTok and the song's emergence as an anthem of the bisexual community. Since this is the Contemporary Music SuperStudy, we did not include these titles in our test list. I also want to stress that we did not name the study the New Music SuperStudy. It's called the Contemporary Music SuperStudy, and that distinction is important. This is not a study of brand new music, but is instead a broader study of recent contemporary music. We also want to acknowledge Michael Pulea and his team at Hooks Unlimited, who provided the hooks we tested with our respondents. Most of our clients at Coleman Insights use the services of Hooks Unlimited, and no matter who you may do your music research with, we strongly recommend utilizing them. When respondents in our study were played the hook from each title, they were asked to rate it on a scale ranging from like a lot to dislike a lot, or to tell us if they were unfamiliar with it. Using this approach, we calculated evaluation average scores that are based on the full range of responses to each song. These scores provide insights into how mass appeal a title or genre is, because it considers not only those respondents who are passionate supporters, but also those who react negatively or are unfamiliar with the song. Now that you know a little bit more about how we conducted the study, I will turn things over to John, who will share with you the first of our key findings.
As we prepared for Contemporary Music SuperStudy 4 by reviewing Luminate's data on music consumption, we noticed more older titles than we had previously seen. Indeed, this is something that Luminate and Billboard highlighted in their year-end report. They observed that for the first time since they began tracking streaming data, consumption of new music declined while consumption of catalog music grew. While the shift away from new music may in part be a reflection of streaming becoming more ubiquitous and therefore more reflective of broader consumption habits, there seems to be more to it than that. Luminate and Billboard noted that this was an acceleration of a trend that began during the COVID lockdowns when people seemed to be finding comfort in nostalgia. They also noted that TikTok and other delivery vehicles are bringing new familiarity to older songs. This older shift in music taste has been evident across different consumption platforms, such as streaming and radio. We've also seen it in our client work, and as you may recall, it was the theme of Contemporary Music SuperStudy 3 that we presented a year ago. Back then, we saw many of the same songs at the top as were there previously. During that first year of the pandemic, contemporary music tastes had not evolved forward as much as they normally would. And we talked about how it felt like the movie Groundhog Day, in which Bill Murray plays a cynical weatherman who is stuck in a seemingly endless time loop. Every day he wakes up and it's Groundhog Day in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. For him, it's the same day over and over and over and over. And for us, music tastes seemed to similarly be frozen in time. So now it's time to see how things look in Contemporary Music SuperStudy 4. What does it tell us about the state of contemporary music? Among this big, broad group of people, which are the most popular contemporary songs? And which one rises to the top? Well, I've got news for you. It's still Groundhog Day. As you will see, the most popular contemporary songs today look a lot like the most popular contemporary songs of a year or two ago. Let's start at the top. 2 years ago, just before the COVID-19 lockdown, we fielded Contemporary Music SuperStudy 2. You may recall that the most popular contemporary song at that time was Shape of You by Ed Sheeran. Back then, Shape of You was already 3 years old, but it was still eligible for the study because, as Warren noted earlier, it was A, no more than 5 years old, and B, among the most consumed songs of the year in streaming sales and radio airplay. Fast forward to Contemporary Music SuperStudy 3, and we had just endured the first year of the pandemic. Time seemed to be standing still, and the #1 song in that study was once again Shape of You by Ed Sheeran. And how about now? What is the most popular song of Contemporary Music SuperStudy 4? Shape of You by Ed Sheeran. That's right, we've got a three-peat. In 3 consecutive super studies, each surveying 1,000 people, the exact same song has risen to the top. It still feels like Groundhog Day. Well, that's one song. Let's take a broader look at things. What are the 10 most popular songs of Contemporary Music SuperStudy 4? #1, of course, is Shape of You by Ed Sheeran. #2 is Believer by Imagine Dragons. #3 is Blinding Lights by The Weeknd. #4 is Someone You Loved by Lewis Capaldi. At 5 is Memories by Maroon 5. Then we have Better Now by Post Malone. #7 is Girls Like You by Maroon 5 featuring Cardi B. #8 is Easy on Me by Adele. #9 is High Hopes by Panic at the Disco. And #10 is Perfect by Ed Sheeran. And how does this compare to what we saw a year ago in Contemporary Music SuperStudy 3? It's very similar. 9 of the top 10 in this year's study were in the top 12 of last year's study. The only new addition is Easy on Me by Adele. In fact, Easy on Me is the only song from the past 2 years that makes it into the top 10. The other 9 songs in this list of the top 10 of contemporary music were released in 2019 or before. In other words, 9 of the top 10 are pre-pandemic songs. So yeah, it sure still feels like Groundhog Day. All right, let's mix things up. Instead of looking at the top of the list, let's go all the way to the bottom. What was the least popular song 2 years ago in Super Study 2? Baby Shark. How about last year in Super Study 3? Baby Shark. And this year in Super Study 4? Was there any doubt? Of course it's Baby Shark. So yeah, Groundhog Day. As we assess contemporary songs' mass popularity, we just aren't seeing much turnover at the top. Many of the most liked songs are the same ones that we saw prior to the pandemic. Amidst the turmoil of the past couple of years, many of us seem to have found some comfort in familiar, perhaps nostalgic, music. Next, we'll dig more deeply into the results of Contemporary Music SuperStudy 4. You'll see more findings related to that Groundhog Day theme, but you'll also see other interesting findings about the lay of the land of contemporary music tastes. This is a chart showing the era distribution of all the songs we tested, which again were the most consumed songs of 2021 that came from the past 5 years. You can see that 44% are from 2021, 40% are from 2020, 9% are from 2019, 4% are from 2018, and 2% are from 2017. Now let's layer in the era distribution of the 100 most popular songs. Note that the top 100 songs in tan lean older than the test list in blue. On the left, note that 44% of all songs tested are from 2021, but just 28% of the top 100 songs are from 2021. So that era is underperforming relative to its share of all songs tested. Taking a step to the right, we see that 40% of all songs tested are from 2020, while 38% of the top 100 come from 2020. Then we see that songs from 2019, 2018, and 2017 really overperform. In combination, songs from these 3 years account for 15% of all songs tested, but 34% of the top 100. And as I showed you earlier, 9 of the top 10 songs come from these 3 years. The fact that the most popular songs lean older is not completely surprising to us. The older songs that are still being consumed highly enough to qualify for this study have inherently exhibited staying power. Whereas some newer songs may still be developing in familiarity and finding their fan base, these older songs have largely weathered the storm, and they benefit from having above average familiarity with consumers. That said, this older lean to music taste has become more pronounced over the past couple of years. Let's look at a trend. Since these studies are done on a yearly basis, we've aligned them on this chart based on their relative era, so that we can more easily make comparisons. For example, the most recent year for SuperStudy 1 was 2018, and the most recent year for SuperStudy 4 is 2021. In SuperStudy 1, the most recent year of music accounted for 40% of the top 100 songs. In SuperStudy 2, taste shifted a little older, relatively speaking, and the most recent year of music accounted for 36% of the top 100 songs. In SuperStudy 3, after a year of the pandemic, taste shifted substantially older, and the most recent year of music accounted for just 27% of the top 100 songs. And now in SuperStudy 4, we see that the most recent year of music accounts for 28% of the top 100 songs. It hasn't significantly rebounded. Moreover, because the year before was relatively weak as well, the most recent 2 years of music combined to a smaller share of the top 100 than we saw in previous super studies. Let me show you the trend. In SuperStudy 1, 83% of the 100 most popular contemporary songs were from the most recent 2 years. In SuperStudy 2, that dipped to 78. In SuperStudy 3, that slid to 72%. And now in SuperStudy 4, we're down to 66% of the top 100 songs having come from the most recent 2 years. And we're up to 34% having come from 3 to 5 years ago. That 34% is twice as high as it was in the first super study. Thus, we have the Groundhog Day effect, where an increasingly higher proportion of the most popular contemporary songs are older hits. I should also point out that in our behind-the-scenes analysis of the data, this older shift in taste is evident among a wide array of consumers. It's not overwhelmingly driven by any particular audience segment, though of course there's variance among them. Now, thus far, we've been talking a lot about music eras, but now I'd like to share some findings related to music genres. Here's the genre distribution of all songs tested. You can see that the list primarily consists of songs from 6 genres. While classifying songs by genre can be subjective, we've tried to do so in a way that's consistent with Billboard charts and other industry standards. Remember that the test list is based on last year's most consumed songs. So the fact that hip hop and R&B accounts for 27% of all songs tested, more than any other genre, reflects the fact that hip hop and R&B is the genre with the most number of highly consumed songs last year. Next most numerous in the test list are pop and country. Finally, we have Latin, alternative rock, and dance electronic. Although this list was primarily built off of the top songs in streaming sales and radio airplay last year, as Warren explained earlier, we supplemented the list with top-tier songs from each genre. If we had not done so, Latin, alternative rock, and dance electronic would have had smaller shares of the test list than what you see here. Next, let's layer in the genre distribution of the 100 most popular contemporary songs. You can see that pop has the biggest share of top 100 songs, 44%. Notice how much of an overperformance this is. Whereas pop accounts for 24% of all songs tested, it accounts for 44% of the top 100. The reason for this is that pop titles tend to be broadly appealing, with wide popularity across various segments of the audience. Even if pop isn't your favorite genre, there's a good chance that it's your second favorite. On the left in tan, you can see that hip hop and R&B titles account for 24% of the top 100 songs. Then you can see that country has 17% of the top 100, alternative rock has 11%, and dance electronic has 4%. Meanwhile, there are no Latin titles among the top 100. This indicates that in this mass appeal study, Spanish language music is not as broadly familiar or as broadly popular as the other genres of music measured. So how does this compare to the previous super studies? Here, we'll look at a trend. While there's been some variance from study to study, there's also some consistency. In all 4 super studies, pop has been the leading genre, but the 44% share seen today is pop's best performance of the trend. Hip hop and R&B's 24% is comparable to the average of the 3 preceding studies, as are country's 17% and alternative rock's 11%. Meanwhile, dance electronic has trended downward over the course of these 4 studies. In our first super study, there were a dozen top 100 songs from artists such as Zedd and the Chainsmokers, but now that's dwindled to just 4. Next, we'll share with you the top titles within each genre. And again, the classification of songs can be subjective, but we've generally tried to follow the lead of Billboard charts and other industry standards. We'll start with pop. On the left are the 5 most popular pop titles in this study. As you're now probably well aware, Shape of You by Ed Sheeran is number 1, and then we have Blinding Lights, Someone You Loved, Memories, and Girls Like You, all songs that we saw earlier. Now, does this list look different if we zero in on the core fan base of the pop genre? Do they most prefer a different set of pop songs? Not really. You'll notice that 4 of the songs are in both lists. That is, the very best pop songs overall also tend to be the very best songs with fans of the genre. Now, you may have noticed that some of last year's most consumed pop songs were not in the top 5 lists I just showed you. This is a good time to remind you that the super study is not ranking songs based on consumption. Rather, it's ranking songs based on mass market popularity, how a big, broad group of people evaluates these songs. Some songs may generate a lot of consumption, but not be well known enough or broadly appealing enough to excel in what we're measuring here. The artists you see on this page, Dua Lipa, BTS, and Olivia Rodrigo, are big and have songs that perform quite well in this study. But it's interesting to find that none of them quite make it into the top 5 of mass market popularity that we're measuring here. Next, let's turn to hip hop and R&B. As seen earlier, the most popular hip hop and R&B song is Better Now by Post Malone. Following it are Mood, Go Crazy, Talk, and Sunflower. You may notice that some of these top hip hop and R&B titles could be described as somewhat poppy, and that would be an understandable observation. In many genres, the most popular titles tend to be rather accessible and broadly appealing. Almost by definition, the biggest hits are the ones whose appeal expands beyond their core lane. Later, we'll see this pattern in other genres as well. Let's see what rises to the top when we focus on hip hop and R&B fans. Go Crazy is number 1, and 3 of the songs are in both lists. On the left, Mood and Sunflower are good examples of that poppy sound that, some may argue isn't fully hip hop. They are among the top 5 overall, but not among the top 5 with fans of the genre. That said, I can tell you that these 2 titles perform very well with hip hop and R&B fans and aren't too far outside of that top 5 on the right. In hip hop and R&B, we generally find that mass market hits of the genre tend to also be popular with core fans of the genre. That's been an important takeaway of our super studies in general, and one that we'll see repeated as we review upcoming genres. Sometimes we hear concerns that a song will lose its appeal with core fans when it gets too big. But such thinking isn't really supported by this research. Songs that are mass market hits oftentimes retain their popularity with core genre fans. Next, let's turn our attention to country. Here are the most popular country songs in the study: Meant to Be, I Hope, The Bones, Fancy Like, and Beautiful Crazy. Again, it's no surprise that several of these biggest hits are rather poppy. In radio airplay, several are ones that crossed over from country to other formats. And sticking with the general Groundhog Day theme of this study, Fancy Like is the only somewhat recent release to make this top 5 list. Now, how does this look among country fans? Meant to Be is also number 1, and 3 of the songs are in both lists. The Bones and Fancy Like are in the list on the left, but don't make the top 5 list among country fans on the right. However, when we dig into the data, we find that they aren't too far outside of it. They do well with country fans, even if they're not in the top 5. Alternative rock is up next. Notably, Believer by Imagine Dragons has been the number 1 alternative rock song in each of the past 4 super studies. Among alternative rock fans, Believer and High Hopes are also the top 2 songs. These 2 songs are the only ones common to both lists. That said, and repeating a theme seen elsewhere in the other genres, if we look a little deeper, we find that the 2 lists are not all that different. For example, although you see Deathbed, Heat Waves, and Beggin' in the top 5 overall on the left, but not in the top 5 with alternative rock fans on the right, if I were to show you a bit more, you'd see that these 3 songs are in 6th, 7th, and 8th place on the right. Here are the most popular dance electronic songs, and here are the most popular dance electronic songs among fans of the genre. There's a lot of overlap here. 4 of the songs are in both lists. Lastly, we'll look at the leading Latin songs. 3 of the songs are in both lists. The two remaining songs on the left have a pop sound, whereas the 5 songs that rise to the top among genre fans on the right have more of a reggaeton sound. Next up, Sam will show you how contemporary music tastes look among different groups of people.
Thanks, John. As we dove deeper into the data, we looked at the best testing songs by various demographics, age, gender, ethnicity, and geography, revealing some more interesting findings. Let me share what we learned when we looked at the data from these angles. John Boyne has already shown you this breakdown of the best testing songs by era. You see 28% of the top 100 are from 2021, for example, 38% of them are from 2020. So the largest percentage of the best testing songs are about 2 years old. And you might be wondering whether this pattern varies by age. Here's that same data broken out by 12 to 24-year-olds, 25 to 34, 35, 44, and 45 to 54 in red. And let me make 3 observations here. The overall pattern is pretty similar by age. The older consumers get, the more songs fall into that 2-year-old category. And third, only 12 to 24-year-olds have more songs from the past year in their top 100 than any other era. You've also seen this data showing that pop represents the largest component of the top 100, 44% on your screen. Hip hop, R&B, second, 24%, country, 17%, and on down the line. But how does this look by demo? Well, among 12 to 24-year-olds, hip hop, R&B makes up almost half of their best testing, 47%, outperforming pop at 39%. Pop is the leading genre, 25 to 34, followed by hip hop and R&B. With consumers 35-44, hip hop R&B falls out of that second position and country takes over that place. And country becomes much more prominent in the top 100 of 45 to 54-year-olds, almost as big as pop. You see that 38 versus 40%. And we've seen this pattern over the years where country really shines among consumers 45 to 54. Let's turn our attention to the best testing songs themselves for each age group, the specific titles. See how well Post Malone did among 12 to 24s? 3 of the top 5. And here are the top 5, 25-34, 35-44, and 45-54. Notice these titles that appear on both the 12 to 24 and 25-34 top 5, but not in the top 5 among older consumers. And also see that these titles made the top 5 35-54, but don't appear in the younger rankers. When we look at the best testing songs of women compared to men, pop, of course, is the common thread, 43% of the best testing songs among both men and women. But note how much country is in the top 100 of women, 22%, and so little in the top 100 of men. Men have significantly more hip hop, R&B, and alternative rock in their top 100. And we also see interesting differences by ethnicity. First, 67% of the best testing songs among Black consumers are hip hop, R&B. The remainder is mainly pop. You see that 26%. The top 100 among Hispanics is hip hop, R&B, 41%, then pop, 33%, with some Latin at 13%. We see very little country in their top 100, but alternative rock is evident. And here are the best testing songs among other consumers. Their top 100 includes a large percentage of pop in green, 40%, country, 32%, and far less hip hop, R&B, a mere 13%. One more demographic view. We asked people whether they live in someplace they would characterize as urban, suburban, or rural, and we want to note the differences in the highest rated contemporary songs among these 3 groups. Urban consumers. See that pop and hip hop R&B dominate their top 100, 43% and 42% respectively. Among suburban consumers, pop, the common thread, is most prominent at 45%, some hip hop R&B at 24%, country 14%, alternative rock 12%. And then among rural consumers, here in green, pop leads at 40%, but here's where we see a large percentage of country, 35%, and only 14% of their top 100 is hip hop R&B. Country does well with rural consumers, not so among urban consumers. Hip hop R&B goes the other way, does especially well among urban consumers, not so with rural ones. Now I'd like to take a look at these results from a different perspective, political orientation. Among consumers with a liberal political lean, pop and hip hop R&B make up a sizable amount of their top 100, 43% and 40%. You see almost no country on the screen, 3%. People who identify as moderate in their political orientation have a large percentage of pop among their best testing, 41%, but also a significant amount of hip hop R&B, 23%, and country, 22%. And among those with a conservative political lean, country dominates at 46%. And we see only a small number of hip hop R&B titles, 9%, among their best testing songs. Next, I'd like to tell you about what we learned of the profile of the top 100 among daily streaming service listeners, daily AM/FM radio listeners, daily podcast listeners, and finally daily smart speaker listeners. First, the best testing songs among daily streaming service listeners include pop, 45%, that's leading, a good amount of hip hop R&B, 28%, and less country, 11%. And remember, country was about 17% of the overall sample. So this is the profile that you're likely to see when you look at streaming data. A lot of hip hop R&B and pop, but not as much country. The top 100 of daily AM/FM radio listeners includes a large percentage of pop, 44%, and nearly equal amounts of hip hop R&B and country. Notice that there is a bit of a difference here compared to daily streaming service listeners, less hip hop R&B and more country. The top 100 among daily podcast listeners includes a very large percentage of hip hop R&B, 38%. And that's higher than what we've seen in the past. And there's very little country in there. And the best testing songs among daily smart speaker listeners look very much like the top 100 of daily streaming service listeners. Not much difference between these two groups. Both top 100s include a healthy amount of hip hop R&B and not much country. Next, we want to take a deeper look at consumers who use various streaming services for music on a weekly basis. Here, we will see differences among those who use Amazon Music, Apple Music, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube for music. The interesting difference here is that Apple Music listeners had much more hip hop R&B in their top 100 and very little country. Otherwise, users of these services look fairly similar in terms of the texture of their top 100. Finally, we broke out the data based upon various services consumers told us they use for, quote, new music discovery. That's how we frame the question. Notice two interesting differences as I bring in this data. Those who use local radio for new music discovery have pop, somewhat less hip hop R&B, and more country in their top 100. Whereas consumers using TikTok for new music discovery have much more hip hop R&B in their top 100, 35%, and less country, 6%. These patterns may change over time, they probably will, but for now, there's a distinct hip hop R&B flavor to the best testing songs of people who use TikTok to find out about new music. We know these are younger consumers for now, and that makes sense. We'll see if this changes in future studies. And with that, I turn things back over to Warren.
Thanks, Sam, and thank you again for joining us for today's presentation. Once again, I want to give shout outs to our friends at Luminate and Hooks Unlimited for their assistance in making this study happen. As I mentioned at the beginning of our presentation today, this is the fourth in a now annual series of studies. We were thrilled with the response we received to the first three, and how the Contemporary Music SuperStudy has emerged as the benchmark for the state of consumer appetite for contemporary music. Much like the third study, this fourth study represented an opportunity to see how the pandemic continued to impact those appetites. And while we highlight some noteworthy points of evolution in them over the past year, our references to Groundhog Day earlier make it clear that the recovery of contemporary music, like many things in our society, was still a work in progress in 2021. When we return a year from now with Contemporary Music SuperStudy 5, we hope that we can identify a lot of new music released this year that generates excitement among consumers. Now, before we take your questions, we want you to know that our website, ColemanInsights.com, is a great source for more details from the Contemporary Music SuperStudy 4. If you're not already a subscriber, you can sign up for our free Tuesdays with Coleman blog, which in recent weeks has featured some of the findings we presented today. Also, if you're a Coleman Insights client, be aware that one of the benefits of our Coleman Complete service is that we will be providing you with exclusive access to the song-by-song data through our website later this month. On behalf of our entire team at Coleman Insights, I thank you for attending our presentation today. I'll now turn things back over to Jay for our Q&A session.
Right. So the first question is a pretty easy one from James, who says, will you be sharing this presentation? I can take that one. If you attended the presentation today, yes, you are going to get a copy of the webinar via your email in a few days, so look for that. All right, second question. In last year's Super Study, Post Malone had the highest number of popular songs. Who won this year?
I remember that. I can answer that. Yeah, so Post Malone actually won the previous 2 years. I think he had 6 of the top 100 last year and 8, 9, 10, something like that 2 years ago. In this current study, the artist with the most number of songs in the top 100 was split. Ed Sheeran had 5 and Justin Bieber had 5. And one of those was a shared title. I Don't Care, the song that they both sing on.
All right. Second question is really about this Groundhog Day phenomenon that you talked a lot about today. Does it relate to, how much does it relate to every genre individually, or is it more affecting the top of the list?
You want me to take that again?
Sure.
It's pretty broad. As we kind of mentioned somewhat in passing earlier, if you really dig into the demos of age, gender, ethnicity, as well as among fans of different music genres, there's an older orientation of tastes, and it's older than we saw a few years ago pre-pandemic. Again, whether you're a pop fan or a hip hop fan or a country fan, for example. So, I'd say in general, it's pretty broad.
Okay. One more question we've got here is do you have a feel for how much of what's going on in the last 2 years is related to the pandemic and how much is related to the quality of music just not being as good?
I'll jump in. Quality of music is such a subjective idea that it's very hard for us to sit here and say the music's gotten better, the music has gotten worse. I think the only thing that we can do as measurers of how the consumers feel about music is that they're just not as excited about some of the newer music that's come out versus some of the music from a couple of years ago. But I don't think there's any denying the pandemic has had an impact on this. We know that new music releases slowed down, particularly in 2020, not as much in 2021. And of course, touring has only gotten back into full swing in the last couple of months. And we do know that touring can sometimes impact the performance of new music. So I don't think we could put a number on like what percent of our findings is due to the pandemic. I think the thing that surprised John, Sam, me, and the rest of our team the most is that the recovery that we thought we would see in 2021 after such weak performance for new music in 2020 hasn't happened yet. And it'll be interesting to see if releases during 2022 perform better when we replicate this study early next year.
This one comes in from Guys Polling. who says, was country down with, I don't know if you have this handy, was country down with suburban from last year and the year before?
I think so.
That
don't
is
have
not
that
one that I
handy.
have top of mind,
Yeah.
but we can dig into it and get back to you.
Yeah, it would not be a Contemporary Music SuperStudy webinar without a good question from Guy. And we know where to reach him. And Guy, we will get you the answer to that question. But I think in general, it was 2 studies ago when we saw a little bit of a blip, an improvement for country that made us, a little more hopeful for the genre that hasn't really been sustained in the last 2 studies. I think that happened pretty much across the entire sample, so it is likely that it is down with suburban consumers as well. But don't quote me on that. We will get back to you and confirm that.
Gary Berkowitz says, what do you advise program directors to do when they feel the need to add new songs to keep it fresh despite low appeal scores?
Sam, why don't you chime in on that one? Well, first you got to turn your microphone on.
How about that?
Yeah, we advise programmers to make sure their AirTalon's mics are on.
I think the answer to that question is that we would all benefit from 2 things: being a little bit more conservative in the short term and really highlighting the best of the contemporary music we played, not trying to get too far ahead of our skis.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the only thing that I would add is the answer to Gary's question really depends on how important exposure of new music is to your station's brand. If it's a key aspect of your brand, you're gonna have to manage through this carefully. If it's not a big aspect of your brand, I think Sam's advice about being more conservative and, at least in the short term, maybe being a little bit more recurrent and goal-based than you have been probably makes some sense.
All right, awesome. With that, I think we can wrap up today's webinar. So thank you everybody for joining us for the Contemporary Music SuperStudy 4 webinar. And like I mentioned before, you will be getting a copy of this recording in your email in a few days. And Warren also mentioned Tuesdays with Coleman, and that's available on our website to subscribe to our blog at colemaninsights.com. For everybody at Coleman Insights, thanks so much for attending, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.